I'm going to start with Tony Early right on my right here. And so the goal, it's a law now in California.
That's right.
50% by 2030. And right now, California is roughly at about 25%?
As a state, PG&E, we just crossed 30% at the beginning of this year.
Okay. So can we get there? And if so, how?
The short answer is it's a no-brainer. We will get there. We'll be at, right now, we're required to be at 33% by 2020. We'll do that in 2016. Maybe it'll take it into 2017. And we've already got line of sight to projects that will get us to the 50%. So I'm very confident by 2030 we'll be at that 50% now.
And what does that 50% include?
Yeah. So the California has a very narrow definition of renewable. So it doesn't include nuclear, doesn't include energy efficiency, doesn't include large hydro above 30 megawatts, and although it's just as renewable as small hydro. So by the time we hit 50%, the state will be actually producing probably 75% of our electricity from non-greenhouse gas emitting sources.
Mm-hmm. So, Danny, are there any obstacles out there to hitting those targets? I mean, it sounds like it's too easy.
Well, I think Tony's exactly right, and the Cal ISO would back him up to say that by 2030 we're more on track for 70+%. The challenge then is going to be managing that grid with all those different inputs, and there are challenges to that, which include storage. And you know, to be ready by 2030 for the massive deployment of commercial storage, we need to be starting to roll it out now over the next 10 years, which means the regulatory rules for it need to be written in the next couple of years to build the market. So that's a big piece.
So it can't be done without massive amounts of storage, is that correct?
It could be, but it will probably be done with storage in the mix, and so we need to get on that. That's the most likely commercial solution that's already being pioneered in PG&E territory down here in Southern California, Edison. We need to scale that, write the rules for that, and CalCharge, one of the organizations we run, is very much part of that with the national labs trying to get ready for it. And then there's the rest of the grid management piece, including the demand response and all the improvements we can do to increase the intelligence of the grid, which is what O-Power obviously does. And then finally, I'd say, you know, there will be shedding of surplus solar electricity within years in this state. And
what does that mean, shedding? You sell it to others?
Well, right now they can't sell it, so there's going to be this likely regionalization of the grid.
Why can't they?
Because the rules as currently structured, and also because of some of the technology and the need for two-way
I think there's a market
streets.
in Arizona. You could probably sell some there.
Mexico, elsewhere, and you know, other uses, and storage will be a solution for that too.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned storage and investment in storage, and of course that's important, and California has a mandate for storage. But the big investment that we've been making and will continue to make is you have to invest in technology in the grid. And you know, people say, well, aren't you worried because it's like, you know, telecom, you know, handsets went away. But realize in telecom right now, the only thing that's wireless is between you and the cell tower. There is a huge infrastructure that is so much more sophisticated today than it was when the internet was first invented. The same is true on our grid. So we've had to invest in sophisticated technologies to measure the grid in real time and then react to it to manage this intermittent power. And you can do it with those investments. The state has been very supportive of making those investments, and they're going to have to continue to be supportive in order to get to the 50%.
Yeah. So part of the equation, Alex, is megawatts, right? Saving power. And you started a company, O-Power, that uses data to help utilities manage demand response, consumer behavior. And by the way, congratulations, you just sold your company to Oracle early this month for $535 million? Or?
Yeah, something like that. We're waiting for the shareholders to approve it, so I don't know whether congratulations are yet in order.
Okay, well, so what kinds of savings can we get from your kind of data analytics?
Yeah, well, I mean, Tony mentioned the importance of the grid. I think there's sort of this intellectually lazy story that the grid is going to disappear and people are going to go off the grid, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I do think that managing the grid more effectively and more efficiently is going to be key to solving this, particularly as we have more intermittent renewables. Even if we can open up the markets and sell to Mexico and Washington State and British Columbia and to the Intermountain West, we need to get better at managing the grid in California and elsewhere. And I think ARPA-E measured that we use the grid on average to half of its capacity, 50% of its capacity. 50% of the grid is laying fallow at any time because it's built up to meet these peak moments. So in addition to talking about new supply coming onto the grid and storage in the form of batteries, we have to get much better at changing the way we use energy and when we use energy. And there's ample evidence that we can do that, and that utilities properly incentivized and with proper technology can do it. I'll give you a particular example outside of California. Exelon utilities have sort of, over the last half decade, as a consequence of gas prices being down and their nuclear fleet being a pale shadow of what it once was in terms of enterprise value, has become primarily a distribution utility. It now just bought Pepco, and now I think 3/4 of its enterprise value will be in the distribution grid and regulated monopolies. They've, at the same time, have decided that instead of nuclear, their core asset is their customer relationships and their grid. And they've manifested this by building essentially a gigawatt of virtual demand, virtual capacity rather. And they do that, one of the ways they deploy that, they do this with us in Baltimore. They've put everybody on a time varying rate. In this case, it's a peak time rebate. In California, by 2018, all customers will move on to time of use pricing, which will create the pricing incentives for customers to use energy at the right time so that we can get more.
But doesn't it have to be automatic, because people really don't care about their electricity, right?
I think I think the automatic thing is a bit of a sort of tail wagging the dog. The automatic stuff will come after there's pricing in place. It doesn't make any sense to buy today a smart dishwasher that will wash your dishes in the middle of the night, because you don't get a price incentive to do that. You need the pricing incentives first. Customers will begin to change their behavior. In BG&E's case, we saw a 20% reduction, 18% technically, reduction at peak during the summer, just by giving people the price signal. That gets improved once you have the price signal in place for long enough so that Whirlpool can come in and sell a smart appliance. Ford can come in and sell an electric vehicle that plugs in and helps you manage your usage. The hot water heaters guys can come in and sell you a new hot water heater. And you get both the efficiency savings and the comfort increase from this new equipment in your house, but you're able to monetize it and justify the early retirement of existing equipment because you're on finally a rational pricing for your electricity.
How big a difference can that make in the whole system?
Well, I mean,
in California?
According to Rocky Mountain Institute, it's on the order of $60 billion a year across the U.S. if you move customers onto time-varying rates.
Of an amount they can save?
That's the amount of net bill savings for consumers.
Okay.
But, you know, Alex, though, raises one of the challenges will be the speed of regulation. So take time of use rates. We had proposed some new time of use rates. And remember, the traditional model was your highest period of payment was noon to 7 o'clock at night, when historically power was scarce, people have running their air conditioners coming home from work. That has totally turned. And now at certain times of the year, we have plenty of excess power during the day because you've got all the solar coming in. By the time we actually got through the proceeding to change what the time of use rate definition was, it had already shifted again. And so the regulators are going to have to get a lot more nimble in making sure the regulations match the technology.
Yeah, for sure. To that end, in particular, in California, where you have this tremendous proliferation of rooftop solar, which I don't think is included in Tony's 30%, and even though roughly half of this distributed solar in the continental U.S. is on his customers' roofs, only 4.6% of solar customers in the U.S. are on a time-varying rate. If more of them were on time-varying rates, more of the solar would be facing west in this country, and we'd have much less of an issue around the duck curve and demand fluctuation in the evening times.
So why is it so hard to spread this model, California's model, throughout the rest of the country? I mean, New York's trying it, Richard Coffin and NYSERDA, and Andy said earlier today, Texas is pretty cool when it comes to renewables, but I mean, the rest of the country doesn't seem to. What's keeping the California model from spreading?
I think it is spreading slowly. Californication is a well-known path on a bunch of fronts. But the truth is, California's been at this for over 30 years. The California Energy Commission did the building codes with Title 24 a long time ago, and every 3 years they ratchet up and get better. And by 2020 we'll be building net zero homes in this state because of that. They've demanded appliances get better, smarter. They've insisted on all these sorts of improvements. So we've just had a head start, but we're demonstrating that that creates jobs. The solar industry, particularly the distributed solar industry, now employs more people than the utilities combined in California. We've created lots of wealth and big businesses that have tackled this sort of new smart grid.
But what does it take? Does it take
So
an
people want to do it.
a populace? Does it take politicians who get it? Does
Leadership.
it take both?
Yeah.
Leadership?
It's a combination. I mean, California has some natural advantages. Given the ability to build these big utility-scale solar farms out in the desert where the sun is shining virtually every single day, that's an advantage. I spent 17 years as CEO in Michigan, and I tell you, the sun doesn't shine that much in Michigan. So that affects the output of those things. And then it's the combination of regulation. So California has been very good in letting us invest in what's needed to run a system with this much intermittent power on it. But they've also offset the increased cost by very aggressive energy efficiency programs.
Yeah.
My energy efficiency budget, it's a 2-year budget, it's over $1 billion. But if you look at it, the per capita use of electricity in California over the last 30 years is basically flat, whereas in the rest of the country it's gone up by almost 50%.
I would add, I'm optimistic. The California model is spreading. It's spreading more slowly than it needs to, but there are nearly 30 states with some RPS. I don't know, more than a dozen states with some form of decoupling. California's been at it for a long time. I think it's 1974, first decoupling came, Art Rosenfeld. In that time, California per capita electric usage has remained flat at 7,000 kilowatt hours per household. The rest of the country has grown by 50%, roughly, to 10,000 kilowatt hours. So in spite of high prices in California per kilowatt hour, the average bill in California is far less than the rest of the country. But I think the one thing that Tony's perhaps too modest to say about one of the keys of the California model is that, and this is an area where I think there's a bit of an ideological resistance in the rest of in parts of the country, and parts of the rest of the country anyway, is that in California, the incentive regulation was put in place that creates incentives for utilities to lead on this, to be centers for innovation and to focus on energy efficiency and demand-side outcomes. They bring in third parties to help them, but it's been utility-led. There's lots of this country still that thinks utilities are the enemy here, and we need to sideline them. And in fact, a lot of the rhetoric.
Well, if you look at what's happening in Nevada, that is the case, correct? The utilities, getting rid of net metering and adding fees to residential solar. I mean, that's not moving the right direction.
So I'll defend my colleagues in Nevada. It was actually, the state actually went much farther than the Nevada utilities want. I mean, the objective for rooftop solar, distributed solar, is make sure those customers pay for use of the grid. I mean, I have customers that come up to me and say, hey, I got off the grid, I've got rooftop solar. They are the heaviest grid users around. And I usually say to them, fine, I'll be over tomorrow and take my wires back. And they go, no, you can't do that. Nevada was just trying to get, and they had the pendulum swing way too far. So they didn't grandfather people who had already invested, and that's why it's messy.
We are going to debate the solar wars in Nevada tomorrow, I believe, and there's always two sides to every story, and we should be careful about the cost-benefit analysis of rooftop solar. I would just point out that California's utilities have led. They haven't always done so willingly. They have been dragged by a legislature and a CEC and a PUC that has demanded them to, and that's been because of a populace and a social movement, really, that has demanded it. Yeah. And now that's ratcheting up. 350, the bill last year, to demand 50% improvement in energy efficiency in buildings here and the 50% renewables portfolio standard. That bill was much fought, much contested. There was much kind of screaming that the sky will fall, as there was when the renewable portfolio standard was raised to 33%, as there was when it was raised to 20%, even though each time we bust it wide open. So, people lead, politicians follow, businesses get in line is actually the story of the California energy.
I think, just to say, though, we've been talking about why California is special. It is happening in New York in a slightly different way. It's happened in Massachusetts, but it's also happened in states that are not bright blue states. We've seen Governor Pawlenty, who may not be recognizable to the Republican Party of today, but when he was governor, passed very aggressive energy efficiency standards in Minnesota. Michigan, under Governor Snyder, has done the same. Even Mississippi has an energy efficiency resource standard now.
So I'm going to open to some questions from the audience. Do we have, yes, there's one down here in the front. Julia.
Hi, Julia Ham with SEPA, the Smart Electric Power Alliance. So we were talking earlier about time-varying rates, and I hear a lot of many stakeholders who say, time-of-use rates, time-varying rates, dynamic pricing. They're concerned about it because it's too complicated for customers to understand. I'm curious how each of you respond to that comment from stakeholders.
Well, yeah, we have heard that. What we want, we would prefer to have A, more time, but B, also not to have time of use be the default rate. We want to convince customers that it is the smart thing to do, and we think we can over time. When you force customers to do something, a lot of them aren't going to like it at first. Ultimately, I think they'll realize it does make sense for them. So, we argue about how to implement it, but not that we ought to go there.
My view is that the policies need to be set, the signals sent through the incentive structure, and then the businesses will fill in, make that easier, use technology. We're riding the backbone of Moore's Law here. We'll make it pretty simple for you to get the smart energy power system rolling, and you don't have to think about that as Mr. and Mrs. Jones in suburbia. That'll become seamless to your experience of electricity, and that's going to be ratcheted up through time. That's on an exponential clip, not a linear one. And per the conversation with Jeremy Grantham, the demands for this, the drivers forcing this are going to accelerate as well. So I think the question in this conversation is really, when do we get to 100%, not 50?
So on the rates, just quickly, we all know nights and weekends from cell phones. We certainly can make electric rates complicated enough that even Stephen Chu doesn't understand them. But we ought to make them simple enough for everyone to understand them. And we have in Baltimore where they went with this first step approach, which is to give people a rebate if they saved energy, which is who doesn't like a rebate. We have 3/4 of people saying that they like the program, they feel better about Baltimore Gas and Electric than they ever had as a consequence of this. You can take a first step like that and get people comfortable with the idea that things cost different amounts of money at different times of day. It'll be easy. We won't, the surge rates in Uber have another way of acclimatizing us to the reality that services cost different.
So we have another question over here.
Sorry.
Please identify yourself.
Yeah, Michael Malik, CEO of Sunlink. Could it be said that I'm inferring from your conversations that since you have line of sight to meet the requirements, the RPS, et cetera, that there's really no incentive other than the utilities to implement the clean energy? Commercial in California will just ignore everything because you're solving their problem for them. That's the first question. And then the second question is related to that. Is that your preference, or would you rather have more distributed generation?
Well, the funny part is that distributed generation doesn't count towards the 50%. And it's not because distributed is not renewable. It was a battle between union labor and non-union labor. Had nothing to do with the environment. And so that's kind of off the table. And when I say there's line of sight, there's a lot of work to be done. We got to keep investing in the grid. We keep making sure that we've got good vendors that are coming in and bidding on electricity competitively. But the rooftop solar distributed generation doesn't fit into that equation. Now, I think a number of us would like to see it count because it makes sense. It's just as renewable as anything.
Why doesn't it count? What's the union?
Union labor builds big utility scale, non-union labor builds rooftop, and when SB 350 was passed, there was a huge battle there. And
can I just say to the second question, I think the goal here should be intense competition. We have to continue to innovate and improve the electricity system, make it smarter, make it more intelligent so that we can do just-in-time delivery of electrons to meet demand. And for that, you need the distributed grid. That's the evidence of the last 15 years. You need the startups that are populating that world, coming up with the brilliant ideas. The software and finance engineering is as important as any piece of hardware or kit on the distribution or transmission system.
one other piece that's critical is expansion of the footprint of the California ISO. We need a bigger market. There are times right now where we have excess power during the day in California in the spring when you don't have heavy load. We could export that if we had a bigger footprint, and it would make absolute sense to have a regional market for electricity.
We have time for one more quick question here. Please identify yourself.
Stefan Heck, the CEO of Noto. We also had a second target in California, which was 50% of transportation to be decarbonized. If we actually hit that goal, are you ready to deliver that much power to EVs on top of the 70% renewable that you just talked about?
You know, we've run the numbers. I'd love to say, oh yeah, we're going to be selling a lot more power. We've got plenty of power in California because right now our capacity factor on the whole system in California, I don't know, 55%. So you could basically double and you'd still have the capacity there. So I have no problem.
But that's a great point, that the electrification of vehicles is part of the solution as well, because that's storage on the grid dispersed throughout the system, and that interstitial asset will become something that we use with the intelligence that OPower and Oracle are going to build.
Great. Okay. Well, we have 18 seconds left, so let's give our panel a great round of applause here. Thank you. Applause here. Thank you. Applause here.